Hey everyone, this is Josh Schlossberg with the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. It's been a little while, back in action, and I'm going to go solo this time to talk about an issue that's been on my mind for quite some time, but has been really under the microscope recently with the election. And the despair that's in the air is making people say, you know what, we really got to pull back and kind of just play defense and don't really ask for too much. We're just trying to hold on to the little bit of scraps. Personally, I think that is the opposite of the strategy that we should be employing. And frankly, it's the same strategy that the environmental movement has been avoiding for decades, no matter who is in power. So I think we have to look at things in terms of the long game. Now, let's first just acknowledge that no matter who is controlling what, the environmental movement has been consistently losing for decades. There were certainly some gains right when it started in the beginning, Clean Water Act, things like that. But over time, all of those have been eroded, and we're losing continuously more wildlands. There is more pollution being put into the air and the water, more toxics, more climate change pollution, et cetera, et cetera. So we're literally losing more ground every year. So it might be worthwhile to say, hey, we need a whole reset here. And a lot of people have thought, and this is where a lot of the mainstream environmental movement has gone, we can't ask for radical things. We can't make big demands. That's not where people are at. Let's just ask for little things. Let's compromise along the way. In fact, let's advocate for a lot of things that maybe aren't preservation or land protection, but are less impactful. And let's just stay the course. Well, we've stayed that course for decades and we're losing. So maybe that was worth trying. But if we can't acknowledge that that is not effective, I don't think we're ever going to pull out of the tailspin. So while people are saying, oh, no, now is the time we need to lean more into the half measures and really, frankly, advocating for environmental destruction that is not quite as bad, I say it's the complete opposite. And many other folks agree with me. We need to take stock and have something tangible to rally around. So here is what I think a lot of the problem has been. It's sort of like, well, we're in favor of this, but, not a full version of that. And sometimes it's like, what is that cause, right? So climate change, I think, in many ways has been the advocacy around it has been one of the best thing that's happened to the environmental movement. It's really put it on the board in terms of the mainstream. I think it's extremely important. It's really hard to address any issues without addressing climate change. So I think that's really important. But unfortunately, a lot of the climate change movement, and obviously not listeners of this podcast, are it's just verbally opposing the idea of climate change without any real actions. And in fact, it's continuing to advocate for a higher level of consumption than we've ever seen, whether it's energy or resources. A lot of this is ignoring, or even in some cases, advocating for the despoilation of carbon storing forests and other landscapes, completely ignoring those issues, ignoring the issues of livestock and the contributions of industrial livestock to climate change, etc. So I feel like obviously the climate is central, but a lot of the climate movement has become virtue signaling. And really, what is the thing to rally around? It's advocating for certain green technologies, which in some cases might be useful. I think that may be the case. In other cases, it's sort of neither here nor there, kind of irrelevant, almost a red herring. And in other cases, it may be doing more harm than good. So I don't think the current version of the climate movement, which has basically become the environmental movement, is doing its job. And I don't think that the last of the conservation movement is really doing its job either, because a lot of it is advocating for logging. I mean, we have large organizations, and I'm not going to name them here, but they're literally having part of their mission to log our carbon storing forests, and that can't be the answer, right? So let's give an example of what might be some of this way of thinking in terms of, well, we can't get all this, so let's just advocate for the little bits and hope we can get that. Now, a lot of what we're addressing at Eco Integrity Alliance right now is basically one of the largest land manipulation schemes we've ever seen, and it's flying almost completely under the radar. So that's why we're focused on what I call wildfire pretense logging right now with the organizations that are members. This is our main campaign, our primary campaign, and this is what they call wildfire fuel reduction logging, forest reduction logging, and it's removing trees pretending that it's going to protect communities or the forest itself from wildfire, while the most credible peer-reviewed studies, independent scientists who aren't at the behest of agencies or universities that get agency funding, or the logging industry, showing that actually logging these forests, including in the dry west at lower elevations, is more likely to have fires catch, to burn hot, including crown fires, and to spread quicker to communities because it opens the forests up to wind. That this stuff is pretty accepted and pretty obvious if you look at the evidence, but there are millions of acres of this being pushed forward. There is the Section 40807, which is emergency authorization to push this forward. And not only are a lot of environmental groups, even forest protection groups, pushing against it, some of them are doing nothing. A lot of them are advocating for it. So let's just take that issue. Now that I gave you the overview, once again, I'm sure you know about this. So the idea of, quote, thinning, as they call it, which in almost every case, whether it's a good idea or not, which I don't think it is, I don't think there's evidence that thinning forests outside of 10 or 100 feet around homes is effective. You harden the home, defensible space pruning right around the home, but beyond that, it's not effective. But this idea of thinning is actually clear cutting, and it's old growth logging. I have seen that in almost every instance out west here, particularly in Colorado where I'm stationed, but elsewhere as well. So, working with some communities who are dealing with this stuff, and I think everyone I'm working with is well meaning. I think a lot of them want to say, hey, well, some of this, quote, mitigation in the forest is worthwhile, just not what they're doing. I've tried to explain that this is their version of mitigation. They're not going to do any other version of it that doesn't cut more trees, because that provides the logs to the contractors, and it's just not going to happen without that. But let's just say there's a scale of 0 to 10. So 0 is none of this. So personally, that's the stance of Eco Integrity Alliance, that wildfire fuel reduction logging in forests, again, outside of 100 feet around people's private property, is not legitimate. In the rarest of cases, that it may reduce the spread of a mild to moderate fire, those are not ones we should be doing anything about anyway. So that's not harmful to the forest. Even the severe fires are not harmful to the forest. This is really about community protection, and it doesn't protect communities, is what the evidence shows. It's a false sense of security, can make it worse. The large fires that are the threat to communities, which are during the hot, dry, windy weather, this thinning does either nothing, as many studies, including Forest Service studies, show, or it makes the situation worse. So 0 is Eco Integrity Alliance position, but we work with people who don't have that position. Okay, so 10 would be the worst version of it, right? So let's just say a particular agency is doing a level 8. So that's pretty high up there on the scale, right? Those of us who want 0 are not happy with that. So let's just say there are folks who want level 4. They're saying, well, we should go in there. They want to cut out some of the smaller diameter trees. They'll never just do that. That's not economical for them. It's too much labor. It's just, they're not going to do that. But let's just say that is their position. We want to get this to 4. So a 4 on the scale of logging instead of the current 8. And so in their mind, what they're saying is like, okay, we gotta make this clear to the public and our decision makers in the media that we're not the unreasonable 0 people, right? We're not the 0 cut, we're the 4 cut. So we're just saying we want you to do some thinning of these forests and not the level that you're doing. Well, first of all, that doesn't really have any sort of rallying cry to get around. Well, some forms of mitigation, but not others, and it's complicated which versions of it. Like, good luck getting people to gravitate around that. But let's just say that you could do that. Well, what happens is the agencies hear this and they're saying, oh, no, we're on the same page. We agreed 10. We would never do 10. We want to do just some version of the thinning. And basically what you're saying is you have some mild disagreements on exactly how we're doing it. So we're pretty much there, but you know what? We'll change a couple things. So they say. There's no real evidence. And see, win. And then the politician can say, look at what we did. We brokered this compromise. And the media can say, problem solved. And they're basically gone from 8 to 7.9, if that, right? Maybe they go down to 7.5 at most, but oftentimes they'll just stay at 8. So I don't think that way of advocating is effective, even if you think that 4 is the answer. If you think that 4 is where we should be, you got to start from 0. So the 0 is a moratorium. So a temporary moratorium can have everyone's version of it. You're saying, just in the meantime, until we figure this out, you have to stop all of that. That is what puts the fear of God into them and makes them change their plans. So this is the kind of strategy I'm trying to communicate. And it can be difficult because I think what's happened is that a lot of politics, so a lot of politicians have turned into activists. So we have politicians who are advocating for, we need to do all of this. The forests are burning to the ground and killing everyone. We need to do logging. So they've taken on this advocacy role, basically logging industry advocacy role. And now we have the activists who are supposed to say, hey, we need to stop this until we can figure it out. They're actually playing a politician role. They're saying, well, let's find this middle ground. And, that's what legislation is supposed to be. Maybe it's sometimes legislation shouldn't be middle ground, but in some cases, maybe it does balance it. But if you're not starting from a push from one end when it's already at an extreme, you're not going to get that balance. And then, of course, I would say the media has turned into political party operatives. So they aren't really interested in the finer points of this. They kind of look down a lot of times on advocacy. And I can say this, I was a journalist and I saw how the sausage was made. So they are not necessarily going to be really friendly or even cover a topic if it kind of makes their political party, whichever one they prefer, kind of look bad. And sadly, in the case of this logging, this wildfire pretense logging, Republicans and Democrats are equally bad. I understand on a lot of issues, the Democrats are a lot better for sure. But on this issue, they're equally bad. Some of the most vocal cheerleaders right now are the Democrats. Also the Republicans. They're not better on this. Don't worry. But anyway, so that idea of getting to 4 from 8, you got to start at 0. And okay, well, who am I to say this, right? I'm just some guy. What do I know? I've only been doing this for 20 years. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Okay, I mean, I've talked to people who were doing it 20 years before me, and they've talked to people who were doing it 20 years before them. and take a look at the times when we win and the times that we lose. The times that we win are we have firm stances that people can rally around. It doesn't mean that that has to be the end all be all, that that's how it's going to work out. But to push from a certain angle is the only way to make this work. And let's just say that you think that's a bad idea. Well, we tried the other way for decades and we've been losing. So can't we do 5 to 10 years of trying this? All environmental groups team up and say, you know what, public lands are off limits. We don't believe in this wildfire pretense logging, whatever other issue, you got to stop. And it may not work out just that it stops, but I bet we'll make a lot more progress. And can we at least do that experiment that we haven't done in so long, if ever? So David Brower, not sure if folks are familiar with him. He should be. So he was one of the environmentalists in the 60s who really changed, pushed the needle on environmental protection. And he started with kind of more weaker stances, trading away one area for another, and realized that was a big mistake. And he really revitalized the Sierra Club. And then he became too radical for the Sierra Club and they kicked him out. He started a new organization that kicked him out. That's usually a good sign, maybe not always, but if your stances are so pro-environmental that you get kicked out of your environmental group, you're probably doing something right. So I'm going to read a quote from him, and this is really the center of my personal philosophy and a lot of what Eco Integrity Alliance is moving forward on. And curious to hear what you think. So David Brower lived from 1912 to 2000. This is his quote from one of his books. Compromise is often necessary, but it ought not to originate with environmental leaders. Our role is to hold fast to what we believe is right, to fight for it, to find allies, and to adduce all possible arguments for our cause. If we cannot find enough vigor in us or our friends to win, then let someone else propose the compromise, which we must then work hard to coax our way. We thus become a nucleus around which activists can build and function. So that last part, becoming a nucleus around which activists can build and function. It doesn't mean you have to agree with, say, a zero-cut philosophy, but understanding that that is at least one push. So the bad cop is covered, right? And then other work can be done if you see fit. So I'll mention another movement just to help people understand. And this is more controversial, but so pro-choice versus pro-life. So think about those movements, which I think pretty much all of us are going to have a pretty strong stance on one of these sides here. But you can't deny that both sides, whether you agree with them or not, have something to rally around, right? Something strong, and it's either no abortion or access to abortion, right? Now, it's not the same thing as creating a policy that may end up being something that's middle of the road or whatever. So pro-choice advocates basically right to abortion at all times. This is the choice of the woman here. And then pro-life says, no, that's never appropriate. So most people actually aren't at either position. Most people have views that are in the gray, and that may be the case for environmental issues too. Policy like Roe versus Wade kind of reflected that. Pretty much everyone hated Roe versus Wade because it didn't go far enough in whatever direction. But the removal of that has caused a lot of chaos because there is nothing in that sense federally at place. It's state by state, and that can be, the extremes in the state, whatever. So all you got to think about is, do you know what each of these movements stand for? And if you do, does that actually help rally a base of people, even if they don't agree 100% with the position? I think the answer is yes, right? They make it very clear. They're not saying, well, in this case we do it, but not. That's legislation, and that may be necessary. But the movements, the activist movements themselves, their job is not to equivocate. It's to push from a direction, knowing full well that may not happen, right? So that's the way I look at environmental issues. And I think it's worth a try. Can we not try that for a little bit to say, in this case, if we think there is a lot wrong with wildfire pretense logging, whether you support some of it or not. Can we not all say, let's have a moratorium on that until this is figured out? Because the alternative is they're pushing forward full speed like we've never seen before. So right now we have more logging proposed. This is millions of acres across the West. We're talking municipal forests, some of which are mountain parks, nowhere near, we're not talking about a city park. We're talking about a city-owned park in the remote mountains in the backcountry, which is the case here in Colorado. We're talking county open spaces, state forests or wildlife areas. We're talking federal lands, so national forests. We're talking BLM lands, proposals even in the wilderness, and there is some stuff going on with fire lines in the wilderness. They're doing this in national parks. There's literally nowhere they're not doing this. So whatever we've been doing has not been working. We haven't held them back. They're actually expanding their scope, and maybe they've got a different angle on it right now. And can we consider trying a different way? If you are interested in that, please join Eco Integrity Alliance. We're not actively recruiting a bunch of members right now because we're focused on the wildfire pretense logging. So we want to just be able to deliver to the organizations that are working on that. But if you're working on that issue, we want you to join with us. If you're somewhere where you don't have much going on in terms of organizing, we want to help you do that. We're building that up from the ground, the grassroots all around the country. We're going to benefit you. You're going to benefit us. Let's work together on that. And keep in mind this idea of no matter what your position, from 0 to whatever, if it's at a certain number and you want it to reduce, how is the best way to get there? Let's just give this a try. How about that, huh? And right now, it seems like a dark time. It seems like we'll get nothing through. This is the time to rally. This is the time to formulate this so we can push it forward. And you may be surprised as to how effective we can be no matter who's in power. And that's all I'm saying. Let's give it a try. Hope to hear from you soon.